Nashville, Noir, Chapter 18. Laney Granger drove a vintage green Jeep with a soft top and a stick shift. I climbed into the passenger seat. There were no back seats, and she shoved the gear shaft into first gear and peeled away from the hotel, pressing me against my seat back. I felt like an astronaut during blastoff. Had dinner? She asked as she went through the gears, almost side-swiping the car and cutting off another. I did, I said, aware of the catch in my throat. Good. Oh, almost forgot. She reached behind her, came up with a large white Stetson cowboy hat and handed it to me. What's this? I asked. It's for you, darling. Got to look like you belong here in Nashville. I put it on and checked myself in her rearview mirror. Lenny gave me an assessing glance. Now you're a proper Nashville lady. I wouldn't want to look like anything else, I said through a laugh. Big Sound Studios occupy an impressive one-story brick building. Like several other studios I'd passed since arriving in Nashville, this one had a huge statue of a guitar at its front entrance. I mentioned it to Lenny. Guitars in Nashville, Jessica, are like sand on the beach. Probably got more guitars in town than telephones. The lobby floor was pink and white marble, large color photos of performers who recorded there lined the walls. A young woman came through a door, flashed a big smile at Lenny, and hugged her. You look younger every day, she said. You forgot to take your truth serum today, Bobby, Lenny retorted. Sorry about that. She pointed her thumb at me. Looky who I brought with me. This here's Jessica Fletcher, she told Bobby. She's a famous mystery writer. She wants to catch the section. Oh, I know who you are, Bobby said, shaking my hand. Everybody knows who you are from the newspaper. I smiled but said nothing. Well, said Bobby, you're welcome to be here as long as you're with Lenny. Let's just go ahead on back. We walked down a long hall with framed gold and platinum records hanging on the walls on either side, leading to the control room, a dark canvas space painted black. The only lights were pin spots in the ceiling that were trained on a huge console that spanned the expanse of glass separating the control room from the studio, and on a long, narrow, dark wood table up one level from where the console was situated. Lenny and I took seats at the table. Pretty fancy, I said, swiveling in my white leather chair. It's one of the biggest studios in Nashville, she told me. Lots of mega hits have been recorded here. I mean, really big hits. Only the top singers get to record here. They must think that Miss Prentice would be one of those stars, I said. That's the talk about the business, Lenny said. Once a buzz develops, things really start to happen. The publicity machine cranks up, and it's what you call a self-fulfilling prophecy. Exactly what I was thinking. I turned my attention from the console and the two young men working at it to the studio beyond the glass. Musicians had begun filling in, a drummer was setting up in what was almost a separate room surrounded by noise baffles. A grand piano was being positioned, and two technicians were busy placing microphones at the various instruments, four of them on the drums alone. Quite a production, I said as I watched with fascination. Takes a lot to put a song on a CD, Jessica. See, the first thing that happens is I held up my hand to stop her. What had diverted my attention was Wally Brolin, who entered the studio carrying his guitar. That's Wally Brolin, I whispered. Sure is. Looks like he got himself a gig with Sally. He mentioned he was hoping for that. My eyes went back to the studio. Sally Prentice had arrived wearing a patchwork skirt, denim jacket, and green cowboy boots. Her clothing wasn't what interested me, however. She crossed the studio, passing the other musicians, went directly to Brolin and threw her arms around him. Wally and Miss Prentice seem fond of each other, I said. Looks that way, don't it? A few minutes later, Sally Prentice entered the control room and greeted the technicians at the board. She waved at Lenny and me. Hey, hi, y'all. Miss Princess, I said, standing and approaching her. I wonder if I could have a word with you. Sure thing. You want my autograph? She nudged one of the technicians and giggled at her own joke. Just kidding. What do you want? I'm Jessica Fletcher, I said, extending my hand. She took my hand tentatively. How do, ma'am? Do I know you? You look familiar. She should, Lenny put in. Her face was all over the newspaper this morning. I ignored Lenny's comment. I'm here in Nashville helping Cindy Gabriel fight the murder charges against her, I said. I know you were close to Mr. Marker. I saw you sing at his funeral service this morning. Her face fell. If she thought at first I was a member of the press after a story about this rising young star, she now understood that I was something else altogether. What do you want from me? Just a few minutes of your time. I have some questions for you and. Excuse me, she said and turned to leave. I wouldn't dream of interfering with your recording, but I would be sincerely appreciative if you grant me a moment to talk with you. She struck a pose, hand on hip. Her pretty red lips curled into what I can only describe as a snail. Look, she said, I'm not interested in your friend, Miss Gabriel, and whether she goes away for life, she deserves it. She killed Rod in cold blood, and you were interested enough in her to steal her song. She jerked her head, setting her platinum hair in motion. How dare you, she said. But it's true, isn't it? I said. I was aware that the engineers seated at the console had stopped adjusting their equipment and were taken in our confrontation. Cindy wrote Talking Through the Tears. You didn't yet your name will appear on it as a co-writer. That doesn't strike me as fair. I hadn't realized that Wally Brolin had entered the room. Is there a problem, Sally? He asked. You bet there is, she said. This person is accusing me of stealing a song by that girl who killed Rod. Brolin faced me. I don't know what you're doing here, Mrs. Fletcher, but this is not the time to air your theories on who killed Rod. We're working here. You want to watch, fine, but don't go riling up Miss Prentice, 'cause she had nothing to do with that. Maybe we should have this conversation in less public circumstances, I said. I looked at Lenny Granger, who motioned for me to take my seat again. Get her out of here, Sally said, stamping a foot. I want her to leave. When I didn't budge, they both stormed from the room. You always rub people the wrong way like that? Lenny asked, her eyes merry and her voice hinting that she wasn't being accusatory or critical. I tried not to, I said. A voice through a speaker in the control room said, Are we set in there? I recognized it as belonging to Wally Brolin. Anytime you are, an engineer replied. I turned my attention to the studio where Brolin seemed to be in charge of the other musicians. Can we get Sally to do a scratch track? He asked. Sally walked up to a microphone. Hey, you okay, Daw? Brolin asked. I'm just fine, she replied in a hard voice that didn't support what she said. Let's do it. Take one, an engineer said, talking through the tears. Sally talked the lyrics more about than sing them, consulting a sheet of paper on a music stand. It was distressing to hear that song being rehearsed and featuring someone other than Cindy Gabriel. I thought back to that night in the Kaboot Curve High School auditorium when at Cindy Baskowski's she brought down the house with her rendition of it, playing and singing along on stage, her voice plaintive and sincere, the chords from her guitar, rich and raw. Janet Laskowski had once told me that Cindy sometimes practiced the guitar for such long stretches that her fingers bled. I heard Sally's playing that morning at the memorial service. She was competent but uninspiring. I hoped that she would give more to the song she was claiming was hers. A man entered the control room and motioned for Lenny to join him outside. When she returned, she whispered to me, "That's how. He owns the place. He wanted to know what was wrong." I told him there's nothing wrong, just a slight misunderstanding. "I can stay? Long as you don't get into another fracas with somebody, 'cause I don't mind if you do. I'm having me a good time." After the first run through of the song, Brolin made suggestions to the other musicians about changes he wanted made. I kept my eyes on Sally Prentice, who'd taken a stool and looked bored. Brolin gave the downbeat and musicians played without Sally's participation. A third take included her. This time she did more singing than talking, and I had to admit that her voice was pleasant with a thick western twang that added color. But of course I was biased in favor of Cindy as far as I was concerned. Any singer I heard would pale in a comparison. I sat silently next to Lenny. I didn't dare open my mouth and risk expulsion again, and look in the remainder of what I assumed was a rehearsal. But when the band called it quits, Lennon informed me that the musicians had recorded what would probably be the final track, and that Sally Princess would return at another time to add her voice to Talking Through the Tears. "That's how it's done," I said. "Yes, ma'am. Used to be that the musicians and singer would record at the same time, but all this touchy stuff changed that. They overdub the vocals after the music track's finished. Gives the singer a chance to play with the music without holding up a room full of musicians. They mix it together later for the master." The lights came up in the control room as the musicians, followed by Wally Brolin, came in to hear a playback. He watched me from the doorway. I waved. He half-heartedly returned it and lingered there, as though not sure whether to continue into the room or back out of it. "Hi again," I said, getting up and going to him. "I didn't know you were going to be here. I came with my friend, Lenny." "Oh." He looked past me and returned Lenny's greeting. "You recorded Cindy's song." As I said it, Sally Prentice came up behind. "It's not her song," she snapped. "I'm the one who'll make it a hit, not her. Besides, she's getting the writing credit. That's more than she deserves." "I'm not here to cause a problem, Miss Prentice, but a talented young girl's life is at stake. All I'm asking is that you spend some time helping me understand what went on after she arrived in Nashville. Is that asking too much?" She drew a deep, separated breath and turned her back to me. "What about you, Wally?" I said. "I need to know what role having Cindy's song given to Miss Prentice might have played in Roderick Marker's death. If it played any role at all or gave her a motive to kill him. I thought you believed in her innocence." "You ready for playback, Wally?" asked an engineer. "Look, Mrs. Fletcher," he said in a conspiratorial voice, "I have to listen to what we just laid down. How about we meet up later?" "Any time you say. Give me an hour, I'll come by your hotel." "1 hour? I'll be waiting." "Palling around with you sure is exciting, Jessica," Lenny said, putting the Jeep in gear and roaring away from the studio. "Sure beats my quiet life. Only thing happens to rattle my cage is I get cheated by a tenant. Not much to chew on there." Oh, who cheated you? Miss Jessica Piedmont never did trust that girl. Packed up and left. Owes me a week's rent, too. Not very considerate of her. She sighed. Jolted my nephew, too. He thinks I don't know he was stepping out with her. But not a lot gets past me. I told him early on not to waste his time. She was just looking for whoever can get her ahead. A manipulator. Just fooling herself, that's all. She wasn't going nowhere. Back home, they're all big fish in a small pond. You know what I mean? The best singer in their school chorus and all that sort of thing. But this is the big time, Jessica. Being a star in your high school musical doesn't cut it here. Her assessment was hard nosed and callous, and probably accurate. This was a woman who'd been around and had gone through the hoops, and I admit I wasn't surprised that Alicia had vacated her room without paying. To be as candid as Lenny, I didn't particularly like the girl either, based upon our brief, disconcerting meeting. Don't let Wally keep you out too late, Lenny said when we pulled up in front of the hotel. I was surprised to see him at the recording section, I said. He and Miss Prentice obviously work well together. It was more a snort than a laugh from Lenny. Wally, he's like so many dudes in Nashville trying to make it big. Of course, take it from me, it's easier as a musician than a singer. More opportunities to perform, provided you've got what it takes. Wally's a hustler, Jessica. You've got to be to survive in Music City. Another snort proceeded in Music City. I suppose I shouldn't be so cynical, huh? Here I am, trying to make it with the songs I write with my partner up there in Rhode Island. I've still got the dream, Jessica. Still think I've got what it takes to turn Nashville on its ear. I suppose I'll meet my maker thinking that. I reached across and patted her arm. I don't doubt that when you meet your maker, you'll be carrying a good record under your arm, I said. You're a good person. Thanks, darling. You're a pretty nice gal yourself. I thanked her for bringing me to the recording section and promised to stay in touch. Instead of going up to the suite while waiting for Wally, I decided to stretch my legs. It seemed to me that even though I'd been moving from one place to another, I'd been sitting all day. My usual workout routine had been abandoned ever since I got to Nashville, and I was feeling stiff and eager to loosen my muscles. It was a pleasant evening. A short walk would accomplish two things. It would help me stay fit, and it would give me the chance to clear my brain and let me reflect on my experience at the recording studio that night. I walked down here from the hotel, breathing in the night air, reaching my arms overhead and out to the side before letting them swing naturally. I turned the corner, setting my steps in the direction of Broadway. The streetlights provided ample illumination, but the sidewalks were empty of other pedestrians with one exception. I passed one couple, clearly tourists. Judging by their apparel, they smiled at me, their eyes raised, and I realized that I was still wearing the Stetson Lane had given me. I put one hand on top of the hat and snugged it down. When in Rome, I said to myself, pleased that I might pass as a native. My thoughts turned to Wally Brolin. During my first meeting with him, he painted himself as sort of an outsider, not as wired into the music scene as he liked to be. Yet on this evening, it was apparent that he was the leader of the band, accompanying Sally Prentice, a far cry from the image of a struggling musician. Two, he had full command of the song, talking through the tears, Cindy's song as though he'd been working on the arrangement for a while. And there was his closeness to Sally that caused me to wonder. I have the feeling that Wally and Sally were intimately familiar with Cindy's song, that they'd probably been working on it together prior to the recording section, and he referred to Marco by his first name. That seemed to indicate he knew the man better than someone who simply met him a few times, as he told me. I stopped at a traffic light at the next corner and became aware of an older, faded blue sedan standing several yards behind me in the street. since there wasn't another car at the light. It struck me as strange that the car would stop so far back. I entered the crosswalk and heard strains of music in the distance. A crowd was gathering on the next corner. As I approached, I saw a group of older musicians in tight fitting gray suits, snakeskin boots, string ties, and a white cowboy hats were tuning up for an impromptu concert. There were five of them, two guitars, two bass guitars, and a fiddle. As I approached them, they broke into a song, their voices melding together beautifully and filling the previously silent street. Evidently, they had played together for a long time. The band effortlessly featuring first one and another musician until each had had a chance to show off his skills in the solo. A soft round of applause greeted the end of the song. I stopped to listen, joining the temporary audience until a police cruiser pulled alongside and encouraged the musicians to move along. The musicians and the crowd dissipated, and I found myself alone on the street again with several tall, dark buildings ahead of me. Instead of crossing the street as I initially intended, I turned the corner, aiming to circle around the block and head back to the hotel. Wally would be there soon, and I didn't want him looking for me or going up to the room unannounced and seeing Cindy without my being there. There was no traffic, but the car I seen earlier made the turn too, pulled up to the curb and stopped, leaving the engine running. I looked around. The police car was at least a block ahead of me, and all the people I stood with listening to the musicians had drifted off in other directions. Cautiously, I walked past the car, noting that the man behind the wheel also wore a cowboy hat, hardly usual in Nashville, but I couldn't make out any other distinguishing features. I continued down the block but had the uncomfortable feeling that the driver's eyes were on my back. Increasing my pace, I dropped in my shoulder bag for the flashlight I always carry. It was not much of a weapon, but it would do in a pinch. What were you thinking? I chided myself. You're all alone in a strange city. It's after dark and you're walking along a deserted street. What is this man doing? It feels like he's following me. Why is he following me? I reached the corner and turned right, walking uphill as swiftly as I could. This street was much darker than the broader boulevard I had walked down. I debated turning around and retracing my path on the streets with better lighting and decided against it. I glanced over my shoulder. The sedan had also made the turn and was parked at the base of the hill. The glare of the headlights kept me from seeing the car itself. Not that I was familiar enough with brands of automobiles to have been able to identify this particular one should the need arise. By now, my breath was coming fast and my heart rate had reached the level of a good cardiac workout. I hurried across the street, still carrying uphill as fast as my tired legs could carry me. I gained the next corner and could see the bright lights of the hotel entrance halfway down the block. I took a deep breath and slowed my pace, figuring no one would try to wrestle me into a car in full view of the residence doorman. Well, I wanted exercise and I got in it, and I exercised my brain as well. Now that I felt secure approaching the hotel, I began to think my reaction to the blue car had been foolish. I've been concerned for no reason. A man can drive a car without being a threat to a woman. Why would anyone want to kidnap me away anyway? Unless it has to do with the murder or with your notoriety thanks to the newspaper calling. I removed the cowboy hat and fanned my damp face. Convinced my apprehension had been the product of an overstimulated imagination, I looked back in the direction I'd come from. The sedan was perched at the top of the hill facing me. The lights were off. I lingered in the hotel lobby until I spotted Brolin pulling up in his pickup truck. I got in and he drove away without saying anything. There was a faint aroma in the cab of the truck that I recognized that hadn't been there the first time I'd ridden with him. Since he wore a beard, he was unlikely to use aftershave, and I hadn't noticed that he was wearing a cologne earlier in the evening. I leaned toward him and sniffed at the air. You got a cold? No, just admiring the scent you're wearing. What's the name of it? I don't wear no perfume, he answered. Eyes straight ahead, you're imagining things. Where are we going? A little place I know. A bar? Yes, ma'am, a bar. 20 minutes later, he pulled into a small strip mall and stopped in front of the narrow storefront. A crude sign over the door read Down Home. A couple of men in cowboy clothes, including the exquisite Stetson hats, stood with some young women similarly attired, all of them smoking and laughing. Wally got out and brusquely walked into the place. Seemingly oblivious that I was with him, I followed. There was obviously no need to go outside for a cigarette. The air inside was heavy with the blue haze of cigarette and cigar smoke, and I remembered what Wally had told me, that under Tennessee law, if an establishment didn't allow customers under the age of 18, they could allow smoking. An older man with a scraggly red beard and wearing a greasy once white cowboy hat sat at a microphone playing his guitar and singing and in a deep whiskey and nicotine influenced voice. There were about a dozen customers, none of whom seemed to pay attention to him, as they talked in loud voices at the bar and at the few tables that were occupied. We took a vacant table in the far recesses of the long, narrow room. A pretty young brunette wearing short shorts and a tight t-shirt took his order of a beer. I decided to have the same. When in Nashville and was pleased that the Stetson Lenny had given me helped me to blend in with the other customers. Okay, he said once we'd been served. What made you decide to make the section tonight? I was interested, that's all. Interested in what? How a CD is cut? Or interested in me? I smiled and took a tiny sip of my beer. I'm interested in everyone and everything that might bear on Cindy's predicament, Wally. Right now, I'd like to better understand how Cindy's song, Talking Through the Tears, got from Roderick Marker to Sally Prentice. He gave it to her. Pretty simple, happens all the time. What happens all the time? People taking other people's songs. Ever heard of being in the room? No. A performer or musician happens to be in the room when some songwriter is working out a tune. You hear it, you like it, it sticks in your head, and you end up putting some finishing touches on it, and you get a share of it, it's yours. You just happen to be in the room. I shook my head. You make it sound so normal and legitimate. It isn't. A twisted smile could have been seen behind his beard and mustache. He drank and wiped his beard with the back of his hand. Maybe you can educate me about the Nashville music business, I said. You seem to have gotten what you claimed you wanted. They play on Sally Prentice's CD. It looked to me as though you were the leader of the band. How did that come about? He sat back and narrowed his eyes, which were surprisingly small for such a large face. I got the gig because I'm good. Have you been close to Miss Prentice before? You seem to be, well, how shall I say it? You and she seems to be very close friends. You know, he said, coming forward and placing his elbows on the table. I'm beginning to resent your questions. They sound more like accusations. Okay, I know you mean well where Cindy's concerned. I really like her and I hope she comes out of this, okay? But I gotta tell you something else. How you want things to do don't necessarily mean they'll end up that way. Between you and me, I think that Cindy did kill Rod because she was angry at him over her song. I hate to say that, but that's how it looks to me. You don't sound as if you hate to say it or hate to think it. That's quite a switch from when we first talked. I'm just trying to be realistic. That's all. Maybe you should be too. Realistic in the sense that I should give up trying to prove Cindy's innocence? He shrugged, finished his beer, and motioned for another. Mine sat virtually untouched. Wally, I said, when we first spoke at that Irish pub, you said that another woman had introduced you to Cindy. At that point, she'd only been in Nashville for a few days and wouldn't have known many people. Who was it that introduced you to her? I don't even remember, he said in such a way that I didn't believe him. I'm guessing that it was a young woman from Lenny Granger's boarding house who made the introduction. You know Alicia Piedmont, of course? He feigned puzzlement. I've heard the name. Did you know that she's moved out of her rooming house? Really? No, I didn't know that. Skipped out owing a week's rent to Lenny. No kidding? We were interrupted by the old single who completed his set and staggered to our table. Hey, Wally, you old coot, he said with a deep twang. He noisily pulled up a chair from an adjoining table and sat next to me. A pungent smell of alcohol came with every word. Leave it to you to be with some fine looking chick, he said, leaning against me. This gal is more my style than yours. What you say, darling? Wanna do a two-step with me? I'm a pretty good dancer. Wally can tell you that you are too. I think it's time I left, I said, standing. Just when we're about to get a real nice party going, he said. I looked at Wally, who hadn't moved. Will someone call a taxi for me? I asked, looking around. You don't have to get a cab, he said, disgusted. He threw a few bills on the table and stomped outside, leaving the drunken cowboy listening in his chair. You get the answers you wanted from me? He asked as we exchanged the smoky air inside for smoky air outside. Frankly, no, but I thank you for your time. Well, I just don't think you should be snooping around like you do and getting people all riled up. We walked to where he parked the truck. He held open the passenger door, and I climbed in. It's certainly not my intention to rile anyone up, Wally, I said as he started the engine. But Cindy's defense depends on the answers to these questions. You do want to see Cindy go free, don't you? He seemed stunned by the question. He stuttered a bit before agreeing. Well, of course. Sure, he put the truck in gear, but I wasn't so sure he was sure, and it gave me something to think about. We were halfway to the hotel when I noticed Wally glance in the rearview mirror several times. He pushed his boot down on the accelerator and the truck sped down the empty streets of Nashville. What are you doing? I asked, grabbing the top of my hat as he took a corner on what felt like two wheels. We've got a tail, he said. Anybody threaten you lately? Not that I'm aware of, but I have the hotel screening my calls. I turned in my seat and tried to see around the gun rack to who might be following us. Is it a car? What's it look like? Bright blue, an American model, maybe a Ford, 10, 12 years old. Satan? Yeah, know it? I think he was following me earlier tonight. Well, he's back. Let's see if we can lose him, he said, careening around the corner down a one-way street. You don't have to do that, I said, thinking the person in the car behind us knew very well where I was staying. Please, Wally, slow down. Let's get there in one piece. But he wasn't listening. This sucker doesn't have a chance, he growled. Hang on, ma'am. Now you'll see what good Tennessee driving is all about. Wally accelerated even faster while I frantically grappled for a non-existent seatbelt. We roared down one street after another. The blue car had no chance to keep up. He's gone, Wally. You can slow down now. I shouted over the gun engine. Having too much fun, he yelled as the truck dipped into a pothole in the pavement and I bounced off the seat, the crown of my cowboy hat hitting the roof. I grabbed the hook on the gun rack with one hand and pulled off my hat with the other, crushing the brim with my fist. Wally, please stop. This is dangerous. The sound of a siren cut through the air, loud enough to override the engine's growl. I risked a look behind us saw flashing lights. Wally, it's the police. You have to stop. I boosted the horsepower on this baby. She can whip those guys any day. I don't care about that, I yelled. What I do care is that I get out of this truck alive. Aw, you're a sissy, he said, grinning as the patrol car drew alongside us. A voice came over the loudspeaker. Pull over immediately and turn off the engine. Do not exit the truck. Roll down the window. I want to see both hands on the wheel. Wally did as instructed, and I heaved a sigh of relief, collapsing back in the seat to catch my breath. Have yourself a good time there, boy? The officer said as he approached the open window. Just showing this lady what a souped up Chevy can do, Wally said, chuckling. His daredevil driving apparently having released a good dose of adrenaline to course through his veins. The officer peered over at me. You all right, ma'am? I think so, officer, but I'd like to get out of the truck. Don't worry, he's not going anywhere with you. Come on, son, I want to see if you can walk a straight line. Only have one or two beers, Wally whined as he jumped down from the truck. I ain't drunk. That appears to be seen, the policeman said, holding up a breathalyzer. I'm betting you know how this here thing works. To my amazement, Wally passed the breathalyzer test barely, but there was no way I would allow him to drive me back to the hotel. The officer gave me permission to climb out of the truck while he ticketed. Wally, for several moving violations, if I see you again, he said, poking a finger in the young man's chest. I'll hold you in. Test or no test, you hear me? Yes, sir, Wally said, working to put on a serious face. But he was clearly delighted that he made it through the alcohol test and terrified an annoying woman who'd been a thorn in his side. Seems to be, ma'am, that you could use a lift to wherever you're going, the officer said. That would be very much appreciated, I said. During the ride to the hotel, the officer asked what I'd been doing in the truck with a young guy who was close to being arrested on a DUI, driving under the influence. I laughed more from nerves than in reaction to anything funny. I suppose I just wanted to see another side of Nashville, I said. Mind a piece of advice? He asked. Not at all. Stick to the side of Nashville where you belong. We've got a nice, safe city here, but things do happen. I'll certainly keep that in mind. Thanks for the ride, and the advice. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye.